Hello, everyone, and welcome to 368.tv. My name is Chooks, and I'll be your host, your show host for today. With me in the house today is Jason Fletcher, who's the Education Manager in Engineering Education Australia. Hello.
Hello, Chooks. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. Now, before we begin, let's just get a sense of who you are, what you do, maybe what excites you about the work you do as well.
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Jason Fletcher, and I manage the education team at Engineering Education Australia. We're the training arm of Engineers Australia, which is the membership body for engineers. And so we're responsible for professional development activities and training opportunities post-graduation. So when you're a qualified engineer, what do you do next to maintain your career? So the team I lead, we create and curate and offer those sorts of training opportunities. I think what excites me about L&D, and I've worked in this industry for over 30 years now, is just the collaboration between colleagues like here as sharing. There's always something to learn. Our job is to help people do their jobs better. This is essentially what we do. And so we help each other do our jobs better as well as L&D professionals. So I really enjoy being part of the industry.
Oh, great. I just want to reflect on Mike. I'm just going to use myself as an example.
Please
In
do.
this case, moving to Australia, I had to do the skills assessment based on my work experience as a chemical engineer. What is being done currently to prepare people for work in a new country? Like we use Australia as a context here, in terms of what do they need to know to get into the industry here, and if you can talk on about the possibilities of them getting jobs or having a career that mimics what they previously did,
Yes.
as opposed to going down the ladder to start
Yes.
from the top again. What's the current experience, and what are you doing?
Yeah,
regards
it's a great question. And engineering's not unique in this regard in that there's a skills shortage. We've got more jobs than we've got people to do those work. And you look at the infrastructure projects around Australia and around the world on rail and, new airports and new roads. We need engineers to do that work, and there's just not enough to go around. So even projecting how many engineers are training in universities now, if you plot that as a straight line, there's not enough demand. So being able to attract international talent and people who have trained overseas is very important, not just for Australia, but for lots of countries around the world. So for Engineers Australia, you mentioned the migration assessment. So this is looking at international engineering accords and saying, well, what you've studied and what you've experienced, how does that relate to the Australian? So from an education perspective, there's some benchmarks and some strategies. But the point you make, I think, is the most important thing is how do you make that jump, that transition? Because you might be moving countries. There's some barriers to employment around, there might be language barriers, or there might be just, understanding the culture and things like this. And, I've often heard people from overseas say that, the phrase they hate the most is cultural fit. So you apply for a job and they say, what's your cultural fit? And to me, that's just naturally setting up a bias because you're saying, I want to hire someone who's exactly the same as me or exactly the same as you. So I'm trying to think about cultural add. So what can you add? And it's not culture as in the culture of where you're from. It's the culture of your work history or your thinking and your mindset and those sorts of things as well. Now, we realise that there's lots of engineers doing other jobs that, not in the engineering profession who are already here in Australia. They've come to study maybe a master's degree or some further education. They're finding that barrier to employment. So we're in the process of piloting a new program at the moment called the Global Engineering Talent Program. And it's designed to allow people to get some practical experience and some practical knowledge and skills to make that transition. So employers go, you've done the GET program. Yeah, of course you can come and work for us because you've got all these technical skills and things, but you've also had this additional training. So one part of it is an internship where you work for a company that's manned by real engineers who are running it, and they run the company like an Australian engineering firm you do a project and those sorts of things. So you're learning some of those sort of business cultural norms of, how do the projects run and how do companies work and how do people talk to each other and interact and getting those really practical hands-on skills. We also offer an 8-hour e-learning course called Getting Started in the Australian Engineering Profession. And it just unpicks all those secrets that people just naturally take for granted when you're from a particular country because you're brought up with that language and that expectations and things. And I've moved countries before. I moved overseas for about 7 years, and like a fish out of water, the language, even though it was still an English-speaking country, the way they spoke and the terms they used were different, and I had to sort of figure out what was going on. And then moving back again, I had to drop all of those languages and behaviors and things. So this course just, it talks about like business acumen and, standard, some language and literacy. People might be able to read really well, but they might not have a confidence in speaking English or vice versa. So again, helps us flatten the playing field for people to enable them to make that jump into their profession.
These are really great resources that anyone moving countries want to have. From your experience, what are some key elements of these, the GET program, as an example, that have made it effective in preparing participants for the workforce?
Yes, for sure. Well, another program we run, that's run for many years, Get's brand new. It's only just been piloted at the moment, is a professional year program. And other membership associations run a professional year too, the Australian Computing Society, the Chartered Accountants, CPAs, and so forth. And it was born out of a migration scheme with the government that would allow people to come to Australia to study, but then to actually stay and work. So they come and do a higher education degree and actually get work. And a big part of that was an internship placement where you could go and work in a company. They would get to know you, you would get to know them. You're building up some experience, because it's really that experience is often the barrier. And it's even for people out of university or school here in Australia, graduates with 4 years experience. That's
true.
Unless you've done some internships and things like that. So it allows people to build their confidence, say, yeah, I've actually got some work experience because I did this great internship and I've got some connections now and those sorts of things too. So the professional year is very much an avenue to enable people to find that employment in their chosen profession.
Yeah. I'm just recollecting my experience with the professional year. I know it was, yes, there was some level of immersive kind of learning, but to a certain degree, there was a little bit of a disconnect with the hands-on practical bits. What is being developed to support people? Let's say, for an example, I'm a chemical engineer. My focus was in refineries, so I worked in a plant. Moving to Australia, I'm not sure there were any professional learning spaces where I could go to the plant to get the concept of how it's done here. And that might be a unique scenario, but just using that as an example, what's being done to create that level of hands-on experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Perhaps I'll give an example of our graduate program, the Engineers Australia graduate program. We've just redesigned and relaunched it, having done a very extensive industry consultation to find out what do graduates need and want, and what do employers need or want. And what we found out is there was a huge overlap between them, and they're all practical professional skills. So things like time management, negotiation, communication skills, the things you're not necessarily taught in an engineering degree, but are critically important to your engineering profession because it's about actually talking to stakeholders and doing things. So one of the techniques we've used in this new program is an e-portfolio. So the grads do a workshop and they do some e-learning courses and they have webinars, and there's a lot of learning content there. But the e-portfolio gets them to reflect upon what they've learned. And we ask them questions about how are you applying what you've learned. So there's John Dewey, the educational psychologist, had a saying that said, you don't learn from doing something or hearing something, you learn from reflecting upon the experience. So it's that when you think about it later, you go, oh, right, that's what makes sense. So the portfolio gets people they've had the learning experience, they've tried something out, so time management technique, they then have a chance to reflect upon it. And it could be record a short video, or it could be write a short piece to say, how am I applying those skills in the workplace? So from a learning point of view, it's really effective because they're thinking about it after they've done the learning intervention and so forth. But then they share that portfolio with their mentor or their line manager or someone who's helping them with their career, and it creates a coaching conversation. So if I'm a grad and I've just, and I share my portfolio with you, you might say, time management, I've got some great techniques, or tell me about what you're doing, or we've got a toolbox meeting coming up a bit later on. Why don't you chair that meeting because you're talking about confidence and speaking and things like that. So it creates this virtuous circle of me thinking about what I'm learning and reflecting upon it. So helping reinforce the learning, but thinking about how am I applying that learning in a practical sense. But then I talk to a trusted advisor or mentor or manager, and then you can then give me some coaching and tips with your experience too. But then the flip side of that again is, as a middle manager, and often in L&D projects, they're the people that will make or break a project. So the senior managers have made the decision, the L&D managers, the staff are the ones that are doing the course. And then you've got this group of middle managers. If they don't have buy-in, they don't understand it, or they're not committed to it, they can make or break it. So they say to the participant, sorry, you can't go to that workshop because we're really busy, or, oh, that's rubbish, you know. Whereas there's these coaching conversations and they can see it, because engineers will believe it when they can see it. I love to say that, yeah. And so by presenting the portfolio, and it could be a video or some diagrams, a copy of their schedule if they're doing time management, you can see it, and then you see the value of the training. You can support that graduate. You can see what they're learning and how they're then going to help you do your job, rather than just being an extra burden. Oh, I've got a graduate to look after for 6 weeks. And then you're also becoming a champion for the program. You go, oh, this is really working. They're learning something, they're applying it. So the return on investment for the organizations who are doing those programs becomes very apparent, because it's just not a theoretical cognitive learning thing. It's a behavioral and an emotional domain as well. So we've just rolled them out and finding it really effective. Great feedback from participants, because there's not a lot of work. Grads are busy and they don't want an extra burden. So these are short and sharp, gets them to think about what they're learning, share it, get some feedback, away they go.
Okay. I think you sort of alluded to my next question, but I'm still going to ask it because I think I would like you to draw on what key performance indicators you have. You do have the learning L&D programs that you're currently running. What is the GET program? Oh, I can't remember the other one you discussed. But now, how do you measure or assess the impact of success in this L&D program?
Yeah, for sure. When we developed this new grad program, we went for some industry consultation to start with. As I said, we spent a lot of time and money and effort finding out what people wanted to learn. But one of the things they wanted from an organization perspective was better reporting. So they wanted to know, where are people up to? What are they learning? Are they engaged? Are they enjoying it? All of these sorts of questions. And we could produce that data, but it was very manual. We have our CRM and our learning management system and our webinar software and e-learning, all of these data points. It was really tricky. So the hardest part of the program from a practical nuts and bolts perspective was getting our reporting right. And we've still got some work to do, but it's we're drawing on a number of data points, because again, engineers, like as L&D people, we like some data and facts to inform our decision making. And so we ask for, how people feel about things. Like our facilitators will ask them, do you think the group was engaged? Did they come back from the breaks on time? Nuts and bolts things that help indicate how switched on they were. We worked with an educational psychologist to say, what's the easiest way to get people to fill in the forms? We don't want lots of text. We don't want the last 2 minutes of a workshop say, oh, can you fill this form? And you're just like tick, tick, ticking away. You go. So simple 5-star ratings, rate the facilitator, rate the content, rate the e-learning. Everyone understands a 5-star rating. But then 2 really important questions. Would you recommend the program to somebody else? And can you apply what you learned to what you're working on, which is back to that earlier question. And the first report came out, I said, oh, the reports are faulty. There's just 2 big black dots there. And it's because they were 100%. The pie chart just had one color. was their dark color. And so we had to test it and put in a bad report just to make sure it worked and so on. So again, those important questions about, can you use what you're learning? It's not just a cognitive thing of, oh, that was interesting. It's like, actually, that was useful. I can do that and it helps me do my job better.
That's really good to hear. I think one of the things we struggle with, or as learning designers or even L&D specialists, is actually, how do we measure success? Do we know this is impactful? So I think this is a really good place to end today's interview. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Jason Fletcher for sharing your insights and being on 360ed.tv today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.